This is a picture of the house taken just a couple of years ago that my parents renovated. This is the house that my grandfather, Chauncey Chintz Allen, had built in 1938. I will show you more photographs of the adjoining houses as well. My parents were enamored of Hanover, and they were thrilled to be able to move back here. So they basically expanded the house a little bit. They added a couple of rooms, etc. So there you are. So here is a picture of the Dartmouth class of 1924, which is my grandfather's graduating class. I have no idea where he is in that photograph, but I'm charmed by it. Right, so he came up here in 1920 from Richmond Hill, Queens, New York City, following the footsteps of his older brother, Ray, who had been here 5 years earlier. And with the exception of about a 6-month period, my grandfather never left. Well, he left for trips, but essentially he settled in Hanover and never left. So partly this story is about him and his family, my mom's family. I thought this was charming because he would have come via train to essentially Lewiston/Norwich, right on the river. And the way you got from the train station on Lewiston was you basically got a stagecoach or the equivalent, and they schlepped you back up the hill in a cart.
Cross the river first.
Well, indeed. Here is another image of Lewiston. I'll tell you an earlier image, right? 1882, right? But the same idea. You can see the bridge over on the right, right? The same, that basically is the predecessor of the current bridge that takes us across the river from Norwich to Hanover. There was a depot. There was, I mean, it's a shame, I think. It used to be that trains were a big deal in this country, and it's harder to travel by train in this country than it used to be. Again, this is another image of the same bridge, and this is again looking at Lewiston from above on the Hanover side. And there is, right, the predecessor of the current bridge, right? So this is a much more recent version. That's the version that was replaced by the current bridge. My grandfather would talk about being met at Lewiston, finding his way across the river, being carried or pulled, I guess, with a horse-drawn vehicle. So this is my grandmother, Catherine Edie Allen. She's also from Richmond Hill, Queens. They were, it's fair to say, they were hometown sweethearts. And this is she on her wedding day. And in fact, my grandfather was fond of telling this story. He graduated from Dartmouth as a psychology major. He had been offered a graduate post in the psychology department, and he turned it down in order to take a job in advertising in New York City. And so he started this job in New York City advertising and discovered that he hated it. And so he went to the Dartmouth-Yale game at the Yale Bowl that fall and happened to bump into the chairman of the psychology department and asked, said chairman, "Is that post still open?" And the guy said, "Yes, come ahead." So my grandfather left the job in New York, moved up to Hanover, and essentially never left. He did a master's at Dartmouth, did a PhD at Columbia, where residency was not onerous. He had to be a resident, I think, for about a year in New York City. Married Catherine a short year after moving back up to Hanover. This is he, right? This is he, right? And by the way, so here he is. He's class of 24. He did not have a vehicle until 1938, right? So Bicycle was a big deal, and also taxi. And my mother, oh my God, my mother would lament. You may be aware that there was a major hurricane that hit Hanover in 1938. And my mother happened to be visiting one of her friends across town when the hurricane hit. And she called up her parents, said, please send a taxi and pick me up. And they, for whatever reasons, the taxi wasn't available or something. So she had to walk through the hurricane with an umbrella, which was useless by the time she got home. She would periodically tell stories about how traumatizing this was for her. How annoyed she was that no one came to pick her up. So this is the house that, again, my grandfather had built in 1938 from a Sears Roebuck catalog. This is what you did at the time. The plans were from a Sears Roebuck catalog. And two of his colleagues also built right next door on Brewster Road. So this is 2 Brewster Road on the corner of East Wheelock Street. And then there's 4 Brewster Road, which was John Amston's house. John Amston was a professor of chemistry with Edith. And I'm pleased to say, John Amston was a bit of a craftsman. This is a picture of my sister Suzanne and the son of her stepdaughter. Okay, so this is her stepdaughter, her husband's daughter, had a child about a year ago. And here's Miko, who is now playing with this marble run that was made by John Amston for me and my sisters in probably 1959 or 60. This, I'm telling you, I still know what the sound of this toy is like. I can almost tell you the pitches that it produces as the marbles go down their course. This was my favorite thing. It's so great. This is New York City. It's so great that young Miko is now captivated by this thing. So that was John Amston. Also, John Amston was a fabulous maker of homemade ice cream. So for a 10-year-old, that was a very nice thing. Here we go. And then Carl and Ellen Wilson lived at 6 Brewster Road, and Carl was a professor of botany at Dartmouth. So, and this was, as I'm told, Brewster Road was pretty much the edge of town. There was not much happening beyond. And in fact, Brewster Road is right at the cusp of a hill. So once you reach Brewster Road, you then go down towards, what's that, Mink Brook? There's a girl brook, one of those brooks, right? And then up you go. Anyway, fast friends. And man, the Wilsons were there, the Amstons were there, the Allens were there for probably, well, the Allens were there for 50 years. The Wilsons were there for almost 50 years. The Amstons more like 40 years. This is a photograph on my parents' wedding day of my grandfather and grandmother and her mother, my great-grandmother, Jenny Brower Eady. This is her sister, Grace. This, I believe, is her husband, Al. This is, on the far right, is my grandfather's brother, Ray, my great-uncle Ray. And the couple there are the Wagners, fast friends of my grandparents. This would have been Outing House, 1953. Right. And this is my folks on their wedding day. Right in front of the White Church, right in front of the Church of Christ of Dartmouth College, with Baker Tower in the background. And this is my grandmother in August of 1954. Unfortunately, my grandmother died very young. I mean, she died at age 52. She had a brain tumor near one of her ears, and she went in for surgery in late November, entered a coma, and never came out of the coma. So she died in December of 1954. That said, since they were both pillars of the community, the folks at the White Church said, let's do something. So they raised some money and they created the Children's Chapel at the Church of Christ at Dartmouth College. This suite, by the way, this is not the original location. The original location, it has been moved. This was moved here, I think, in the late 80s. It is a fabulous place. You should ask to enter the children's chapel at the White Church. It's a fabulous place. My favorite part of it, you can sort of see, in addition to the childlike pews, child-friendly pews, is these, you can sort of see, there are a couple of quilts on the wall, and the design of the quilt suggests stained glass, right? A very soft stained glass, like the stained glass in the church, right? You may recall the stained glass in the church is pretty much these beautiful kind of aqua and rose and clear, and it's not fancy schmancy stained glass, but it's beautiful. And these also are, you know, stylized rectangles. It's a beautiful thing. This space was rededicated. My mom rededicated it in, this was about 1989, I think. Okay, so my grandfather, at age 90 or so, narrated, actually scripted, wrote the script for, and narrated a history of the White Church. And for us in the family, this is just to die for, because he, as you will see in a moment, he had such a presence, and he was absolutely sensitive to history. He also was a utterly gregarious man. So here I can show you. I think this. Here we go. Let me make this bigger for you. Let me move this out of the way. There we go. Okay. So I'm going to back this up a little bit. Actually, I'll play the very beginning because the very beginning is telling, and then I'll play his introduction.
What do you remember about the fire in 1931, May 13th?
I ran out and in the Sanborn house, which was immediately behind the church, and it was clear there was a big fire going on just ahead of me. There was a fire hose which had been set inside, and I thought I might be able to sprinkle a little water on that fire. So I rushed back and grabbed the fire hose and came up and turned it on, and nothing happened. And it turned out later that it had never been connected when the building was built.
My children had gone to bed, of course, when the fire alarm went. And they were very cross with me because I wouldn't let them get up in the middle of the night and go and see the fire.
The other day I was having lunch with Ray Spate Terrio, whose father had preached in that church the Sunday before the fire. He was telephoned and told that the church was on fire, whereupon he ran up and went into the sanctuary, and someone called to him and said, "Harold, please rescue the Bible," to which he replied, "The hell with the Bible, I'm looking for my gown."
Okay, so the church, the White Church, used to be where Sanborn House is now, right on the green, right in, sort of in front of Baker, right there. It pretty much burned to the ground, and as you know, it was reconstructed in its current site. That said, again, this is an hour. Right, this is an hour-long video history of the White Church, and let me just show you, because it's the moment where he there we go.
I'm Chauncey Allen, Professor Emeritus, Psychology.
Very good indeed.
And I am Chauncey Allen, Professor Emeritus, Psychology, and a member of this church from the early 1930s. I came to Hanover as a freshman in 1920, and so recall the 150th anniversary in 1921 and the 200th in 1971. These conversations will recall the past 70 years of our history, roughly by decades. Our 15th pastor, William Henry Spence, served from 1927 until his death from a heart attack in 1938.
Okay, so I'm not going to show you much of this. You can, by the way, this access to this video is on the website of the White Church. So if you go to the Church of Christ at Dartmouth College, you can watch the whole thing. What's genius about this, I'm just going to drop the needle here once, is that it essentially consists of a series of interviews. He just sits down with people. Of course, he knows all these people, and he is asking them to expound on their experience. And it's quite remarkable in that they don't hold back on talking about some of the more difficult historical moments in the history of the church. It's not a completely rosy picture. They come when there is a personnel problem, these people are talking very candidly about personnel problems. It's quite something. You can also see that this man is a charming fellow. So let me just see here.
Mary Norton Maslin, widow of Dartmouth's first provost, John Maslin, has been a member since her early childhood. Mary, could you tell us a bit of what you remember?
Mr. Spence, as I recall him from my childhood vantage point, was a tall, stately, rather formal person. Since he and his wife had no children, it was his custom on Christmas afternoons to come and visit those of us whose families did have children. The Giles and the Nortons lived next door to one another on Choate Road, and Sunday afternoon about 3 o'clock he would come in and examine all our gifts and talk with us, and then go next door to the Giles.
Okay, etc. I urge you to check this out. It's a very lovely and fairly detailed history of the Church of Christ at Dartmouth College. And I could be wrong. I don't think I'm wrong. The conception was my grandfather's. I mean, he narrated it, he scripted it. He basically, look, let's talk to this. I mean, Bob is one of the interviewees along with Jean. It's a document that tickles me. All right. Here's my mom. Let's see, in 1945, she would have been 14. Here's my mom and her brother, John. I learned just this afternoon that John and Bob were classmates at Hanover High School. John was younger than my mom by 3 years. John, by the way, went on to become a very, very distinguished professor of electrical engineering at MIT. Okay, I hope you can see this. This is my mom's yearbook entry, okay? And if you can't see it, I'll read it to you. Everyone's heard the joke about the man behind the door when the abilities were passed out, but what about the girl who was standing in the front row? She's finally been found, right in the class of 1949. No doubt such a remark ought to be prefaced with a blast of trumpets, but there is absolutely no need for fanfare. Sylvia is her own advertisement, and surely no model could poo-poo Sylv's natural attributes for the profession. By the way, that's a misprint. SILV is a misprint. I can tell you that because you can imagine, I have studied this yearbook pretty carefully. Her nickname was Sliv. So her name was Sylvia, but all of her friends refer to her as Sliv. I have to say, I don't know why I love that so much, but I think it's such an unusual nickname, and it's much more interesting than Sylv. And it tells me that there must have been a real rapport between my mom and these people who wrote Sliv in her yearbook. But better and better still, not only is she always the belle of the ball, but also a superb performer on the ice, the envy of the French class, and an incomparably efficient secretary for a harassed Indy ward. Indy is the yearbook at Hanover High School. She deserves an additional laurel for neatness and assurance. And anybody who knew my mom will attest that she was the most neat and well-organized person on the planet. Incredible. It is impossible to forget how she sparkled when she was crowned Princess of the Prom, or how, with flushed and smiling face, she led the cheers of the school. Okay. Oops, wrong way. Here we go. This is Hanover High School, 1946 yearbook, right? You recognize the facade, right? But it has been exponentially expanded now. Okay. So one of the things that my mom was involved in was something that was called rhythmic choir.
What?
But essentially was liturgical dance. And the liturgical dance program at the White Church, the same church, was led by a woman named Margaret Palmer Fisk, who wrote a book called The Art of the Rhythmic Choir. And indeed, the woman on the far right is my mom. And I didn't talk to her very much about this, but clearly this was a thing. And so happened that one of the foremost practitioners in the country of this was here at Hanover High School, or I should not say Hanover High School, but the Church of Christ at Dartmouth College, doing her thing. Presumably, I'm assuming it was not on a weekly basis, but it was on a regular basis. This book has one more photograph of you. By the way, you can tell this is the White Church, right? I mean, it's the old church before they installed the organ, right? There you go. So this was a big thing for my mom, and a regular thing for her.
Mark, what would rhythmic choir do?
Interpretive dance.
Exactly. They would do interpretive dance with scripture.
Okay.
All right. So there would be some sort of scripture, and I'll tell you, this survives in two ways, in my experience, in the Upper Valley. Someone mentioned the Christmas pageant at Lyme, right? Abigail Murphy has choreographed the Christmas pageant at Lyme in a way that is suggestive of scripture interpretation. The other is there's a woman, gosh, what is her name? Meg Robinson? Oh, it'll come to me. There's a woman in Woodstock who actually, in her prime, was part of the Maris Cunningham dance troupe in New York City. But I was involved in a performance of an original oratorio by a composer named Ludi Saul. And in addition to sung and narrated parts of this performance, there was an elaborate choreographic component. And this woman had 4 dancers who were interpreting scripture as we sang this oratorio. So it does still survive in certain corners. I flipped this book open, and lo and behold, there is a letter to my mom from the author in this book. Dear Sylvia, so many nice memories, etc. Amazing. Right, it's another photograph from the same activity, the same group. All right, I was speaking with a couple of you about the Christmas mystery. So both my parents were in the Christmas mystery, not in the same year. This is 1948. My mom would have been a senior. And I'm assuming that most of you know about the Christmas mystery in Hanover, but just in case there are a couple of you who don't. Until 2020, this was something that had happened for something like 85 straight years. When I caught up with it, and by the way, I should say, I hasten to say, my grandparents dropped everything in order to see the Christmas mystery every year. I mean, they had no kids in it or grandchildren in it, didn't matter. This was a community thing, and they made sure that they attended this thing.
2 performances.
So exactly, 2 performances back to back, an hour apart. In Rollins Chapel most recently, although Bob, you said it started at the White Church years ago?
Originally, it started at the Church of Christ.
Yeah, right. So it involves seniors. The senior girls are dressed up as angels, or those that want to anyway, and senior boys are shepherds, those that want to. And there are a few adults who pose as the wise men, right? So this is my mom at the apex of this pyramid.
That's right.
And this is again 1948. The idea is you sing a handful of carols. It doesn't last more than half an hour. There is a nativity scene at the center. The big deal, at least was 5 years ago, the big deal was the identity of Mary was kept a secret because Mary was always a member of the previous graduating class. So they didn't let anybody know who was going to be. And then suddenly she appears and it's like a big deal. Oh, there's
It's the mystery.
So, sorry?
That's the mystery.
That's okay, that's the mystery. And the boys also, their boys are singing, you know, they're shepherds and they sing. And then the best part of this, and I'll show you a picture in a second, is I hope this happened 50 years ago, 60 years ago. Kids' families bring gifts and deposit them at the creche. A boatload of gifts. And the gifts all go to needy families in the area. It's quite something. It was quite something. Unfortunately, the pandemic at least has put a temporary kibosh to it, I'm sorry to say. So here is, I think this is either 2018 or 2019. And here are the gifts, right? And by the way, that's a small subset of the gifts that would be deposited at the creche. It's an incredible collection. People take this very seriously and everybody brings something. That's quite something. Hanover prided itself on having one of the oldest such mysteries in the country. Unfortunately, that string has been broken. Okay. So, my mother was a figure skater, and by all accounts, a very, very accomplished one. Not in the sense of going off to the Olympics, but locally, she was good. And she would perform at the Dartmouth Winter Carnival, where there would be an ice show. Now, mind you, it says Davis Hockey Rink. I'm going to show you a film. I think Bob can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that means that Davis Hockey Rink is, at least part of this performance is, flood the football field, right? Wait for it to ice over, plant a bunch of spotlights around the perimeter, and do a night show.
No, it was an actual building.
It was.
So the Davis Rink. So, okay. So there is an actual building, but in addition, whatever they did, go ahead. So you know, please.
Well, when I was quite young,
Yes.
it was called
Oh, yeah.
Outdoor Evening, and it was on the golf course.
On the golf
They
course.
they flooded the section, and, the youngest kids, of which I was in that group.
Yeah.
I don't know what we did, and I remember people skiing down, the golf course with, I don't know, torches or something.
Right.
I mean, this was really long time
Ockham
ago.
Pond was used some years and the football field was used one year.
Right.
So
And I'm the film that I'm going to show you in a moment is the football field having been flooded and frozen with spotlights all around the football field. But yes, I'm aware that Ockham Pond was used as a regular skating site before global warming made it much more difficult to skate on Ockham Pond. And yes, I'm aware that Davis Rink was also a separate building, but beyond that, there was a lot of outdoor skating back in the day.
And outdoor hockey too, ice hockey.
Indeed. So I know this is very small, but each of those circled, this is the program for this ice show. And my mom is in 3 different acts, if you will, right? She's got it's a duo with her good friend Nora Del Truxall, and then a much larger group, the Hanover Highlanders. I'm not sure what that would have been like. And then a group of about 6 folks here, clearly people dancing a waltz on the ice. I never saw my mom dance a waltz on the ice. I'm so sorry that that's the case. I would have loved to have seen her dance a waltz on the ice. So here's a picture from the local paper, right? That's my mom on the left and Nora Del Truxall on the right, right? Their number was one of 2 featured on Outdoor Night. There you go, right? And it was repeated this year by popular demand. There they are again. Okay. There she is on Ockham Pond. Right. There she is on Ockham Pond again. Okay. Now I have to switch gears here. All right, here we go.
Uh-huh. So who took this one?
My grandfather.
Oh, they have a spotlight too.
Indeed. That's it, right? I mean, then there are others, but the detail is much fuzzier. Nevertheless, that was Noradell Truxall and my mom doing their thing in 1947, I think it was. Yes, my grandfather took, I think it was a Super 8 or something like this. I mean,
16 millimeters.
16 millimeter, okay, 16 millimeter. The lighting, again, you had just lights surrounding this flooded field and some spotlights, and you do. But-
8 millimeter came quite late.
Did it? Thank you. Okay. So this is a pin, right? This is the Hanover Figure Skating Club, prize to Sylvia Allen, 1947. I actually no longer have this because I gave it to my teacher when she left Hanover. I was skating very seriously for about half a dozen years, between recently between 2015 and 2020. I had a fabulous teacher at the Champion Rink, and I just decided she needed to have this. So I have another version of this which is not inscribed with embossing, but anyway, my mom won a prize. And here she is. This is, I mean, you would never write a caption like this, but anyway, quite an eyeful. Drew finds these two 16-year-old Hanover High School skating champs, left to right, Noradell Truxall and Sylvia Allen, who took part in the outdoor night held Friday evening, something to inspect. The girls were the hits of the ice show. Then I just grabbed some other photos of mostly Occompon skating back in the day, right? So these are clearly people are doing some figure skating here, etc. This was a big deal. I mean, these ice shows were a big deal. Right? Speed skating was part of the carnival back in the day. I did not know that. I just thought this picture of this bonfire was to die for, so I grabbed it, put it in here. This is not Winter Carnival. You see there's no snow on the ground. Okay, but again, moving snow in order to make room for the carnival. Bring those horses to work. And then, surely you know, but I'm sharing with you some of the more
Notorious.
right, notorious ice sculptures as part of the carnival. When you could do ice sculptures, right? I mean, sometimes it's harder to do these days, but anyway, you can see. I mean, this is the fire-breathing dragon, right? And these things are immense. You see this little child sitting in the front there. Right, 1982, Moby Dick. 1956. Okay. So it used to be what is now called Rauner Library, used to be called Webster Hall. I guess it's still called Webster Hall, but Rauner Library at Webster Hall. Used to be the primary auditorium for both Dartmouth and the community. And here is a performance of Handel's Messiah in 1947 in Webster Hall. Both my mother and her mother were involved in this performance. I cannot, the images are too small for me to make out who is who there, but you can see the orchestra is pretty substantial. The chorus is pretty substantial. And thanks to my friend Dave Robinson, there is a recording in Rauner Library of this performance. Thank you. Okay. So there was serious music happening in Hanover, to which both my grandmother and mother contributed. My grandfather, by the way, was an extraordinary pianist, though I'm betting the farm he did not read music. But this man played by ear, and he played, let us say, name the pop tune, or that is to say the standard jazz tune, and boom, out it would come at the piano. He had an incredible gift for this. Also, famously, he mentioned this at his memorial service, actually. He was an extraordinary singer of hymns in church. By that I mean to say, he would sing any of the parts. He would sing the soprano part. He would sing the alto part. He would sing the tenor part. He would sing the bass part. He had a very, I would say, undistinguished bass voice, and it did not matter. And for me, he modeled a kind of heartfelt singing of the hymns that stays with me to this day. It's kind of like the Charles Ives passion that one sees sometimes in Protestant churches. Really something. So he loved to sing, and he had a good ear. So it doesn't matter. Today it's the alto part. Off I go. Okay, so this is my mom and my grandfather on his 80th birthday. He was born in 1900. This is my father's father and mother. So Harry Dedman Sr. and Gretchen Hawkins Nelson. They moved to Hanover in 1942-43. He had been in the tire business in Brooklyn, and he was unhappy that his employees were unionizing. So instead of dealing with the union, he left, said, I'm gonna go someplace where I'm appreciated, I guess. So he moved, he basically bought in with a couple of other partners, and then he bought them out. Interstate Tire, right? So Interstate Tire was in White River Junction for, gosh, 50 years. And then he sold it to one of his employees, Frank Crow. And Frank moved the business from White River over to West Lebanon, where it still exists today. It's now Gill's Point S, right? It's just up the hill from Four Aces Diner, but that used to be Interstate Tire until Frank Crow's son, Glenn, sold the business to one of the tire chains. Yep. My parental grandparents, my paternal grandparents lived on Wyeth Road, which is just past the cemetery on the West Lebanon Road. It's that flashing, Wyeth Road is that road that's marked by a flashing light, and they lived at 3 Wyeth Road. Right there, you drive into their driveway as you walk up Wyeth. Oops, wrong way. The Interstate Tire Company used to be right on the corner of Bridge Street and Main Street. So you can, I'm so sorry that they bulldozed the building. As a kid, I remember going by there like, oh, there's my grandfather's business, Interstate Tire. Okay. So this is a description I discovered recently, actually. So the building was built around 1880. And you can see it's 3.5 stories. It was a big building, plate glass and wood frame on the storefront, right? And then more windows on top. And I remember this, cutout letters mounted on the entablature spell out recapping, Interstate Tire Company, and vulcanizing. So the tire business back then, my dad would tell me about this. It was a recapping business. It was not a repair flats or buy new tires, although you can buy new tires, but frequently what people did is when their tires were wearing thin, they would simply recap them. So they would basically put them in so they'd heat up the rubber and they'd put another layer of rubber on the tire. And that was that was a chunk of my grandfather's business back in, again, the 40s and the 50s. Huh. This is just another description of the building. So again, it started as a bakery. That building was a bakery, Vermont Baking Company, and then it became Interstate Tire, 55 Bridge Street. Unfortunately, it's now, that whole strip there is not just a sort of a set of not ugly buildings, but not very interesting business buildings there. Okay, so this is my dad's yearbook entry. They do mention he was a very good baseball player. He loved to play baseball. He was a pitcher and evidently a decent one. He took me to a game at Yankee Stadium when I was 10. And this is in the days of the Mickey Mantle, Roger Maris, etc. And Whitey Ford was pitching, and these names mean nothing to some of you, but in any case, I remember distinctly, it was against the Minnesota Twins, and it was Whitey Ford against Camilo Pascual. And the end of the first inning, it was 5-0. At the end of the 10-second day, it was 10-0. At the end of the third inning, it was 13-0. And my dad said, "Let's go home." I was crushed. Being in Yankee Stadium as a 10-year-old, oh my God. But anyway. So these are my folks. This is actually taken in our New Jersey home back in the day. Okay, so my folks were utterly devoted to liberal arts education. And for various reasons, my mother went to Vassar on a scholarship. So she felt, okay, we have to pay back. I benefited from the scholarship, so we need to help other people attend who otherwise are not going to be able to afford to attend. So my folks endowed scholarships in honor of various family members at the following institutions. There are a couple at Dartmouth. There are a couple at the Tuck School. There are a couple at Vassar. There are a couple at the University of Vermont Honors College. And in fact, I was so pleased until recently, I can't remember her name, it'll come to me. The primary administrative assistant at the Upper Valley Music Center has 2 daughters, one of whom attended University of Vermont. And I told her that she was not in the Honors College initially. I said, check out the Honors College. It's very cool. The Honors College basically makes the school smaller, and it makes it a liberal arts mini college in the context of the larger university. And she did, and she got in. And lo and behold, then she discovers her junior year, she gets a letter from UVM. Congratulations, you are the winner of the Harry D. Nelson Scholarship for Students. Like, okay. By the way, this is a young lady who was adopted. She is Black. So she was born in West Africa. She's a peach. She is an utter peach. And I mean, we had lunch together. It was like, My parents would have been so thrilled, really. So UVM Honors College and also Princeton University. Princeton University, my dad was a character. Most of you did not know my dad, I suspect, but my dad was a character. And he was a very generous character. And when I was a graduate student at Princeton, he was very impressed that I was there on a scholarship, so I was not paying any tuition. He went, whoa, how is that possible? So he basically, I don't understand how this works, but he had a deal that he was speculating on, and he said, okay, if this deal pans out, this is going to generate some real money. I'm going to give this deal to Princeton. And lo and behold, it did pan out. So now there is a scholarship for Princeton graduate students in composition, which has the unfortunate name of the Mark D. Nelson Scholarship. I tried to get them to change it after he died, and they said, we're very sorry, but without his permission, we can't do that. I understand that. Anyway, but very nice of him to do this. In addition, they've served on the boards. I hope you folks know about the Children's Literacy Fund, right? This is an extraordinary organization that brings books and writers and storytellers to underserved schools in the two-state area. The Fleming Museum at University of Vermont is the University of Vermont's art museum. It's a fabulous little place. Their director is a woman named Jamie Cohen, became a very good friend of my folks. And I'm sure they were as surprised as I was when Jamie told them that when they told her that they were from Short Hills, New Jersey, she told them that, oh, my former husband was Mark Matarazzo. Mark Matarazzo was a high school classmate. Incredible. And also Vassar. My mom was on the board of Vassar. And my mom was president of this organization for a long time. Okay, so these are my grandfather again. My grandmother died when I was an infant. And about 3 years later, my grandfather married Margaret Allen. Well, Margaret Murray, now Margaret Murray Allen, then Margaret Murray Allen. And I have to say, I mean, Bob knew them very well. Bob and Jean and Chintz and Margaret were fast friends. I was one of the interviewees by the fourth graders. Was it fourth graders at the end?
No, second through fifth.
Okay, but so I talked to fourth graders. These fourth graders charmed my son. Like, oh my God. So I'm sitting down with these fourth graders to talk about Jean. And we got talking about Bob and Jean's. I suspect, was it mostly you? I'm guessing it's mostly you. Were you the chef here?
He did the baking, I did the carving.
So Bob and Jean would make birthday cakes for numerous people, including my grandfather. And since my grandfather's birthday was August 15, I sometimes was in town for this thing. And these kids, when I told these kids, Bob is a very creative carver of cakes. When I told the kids that one year the cake was in the shape of a lobster, they went, no.
I can't hear it.
Sorry. Am I moving around? Okay. We okay?
Yeah, we're okay.
Okay.
Someone unmuted themselves, that's all.
Oh, okay. In any case, so the kids were completely charmed by this notion that that Bob and Jean had carved cakes in the shape of lobster, postage stamp. What was the other?
Right.
Say again?
Well, not for them.
A John Deere truck.
Yeah.
Right. Incredible. I wish I had documentation of this. I'm sure you do. Please share. All right. My grandparents, and I call her my grandmother because she was an incredibly generous step-grandmother. Incredible. These folks were pillars of the realm. They helped people out at a moment's notice. They were both very gregarious. They aspired to help people, and they pitched in at a moment's notice. And you can tell even from this photograph, right? I mean, they're joyful people, I guess I would have to say. They spent their last years at Kendall, and Kendall proved to be a great place for both of them. When they moved in there, they knew everybody already anyway. I was like, oh my God, it was great. Okay. Allen's rackets, oh yes. So my grandfather, Dartmouth College faculty member, zero salary, right? I mean, the very low salary, very small pension. So he had to scramble to make ends meet. And the term Allen's rackets is his. He would talk about Allen's rackets. And so what he would do to make ends meet? Well, he became the principal proctor of all of the educational testing service tests here. The LSAT, the GRE, the SAT. He was the guy. A truck would show up with these boxes of tests, and he would have a team of graduate students to help him administer these tests. He did this for something like 40 years. ETS drove him down to Princeton to present him with a fancy schmancy clock in honor of his 40 years of service as a proctor to ETS. He was a nationally known stamp collector, and indeed would write a column in a monthly stamp magazine called Here's Your Answer. People would write in with questions, and he would do the research and find the answers for them. And he also did some private counseling, especially for the state, actually. He did some counseling for the state of New Hampshire. And he tested young people as well for the usually aptitude tests of one sort. He went to, at age 80, he went to Alaska with Margaret. They both went to Alaska wholly on the strength of selling stamps, right? I mean, he was an intermediary. He would act as an agent, as a go-between. He financed the entire trip to Alaska through his stamp activities. Allen's rackets, I love it. Okay, now here's where Bob Keene is going to help me. This is Dr. John Sibley, who was fast friends of the Keenes and fast friends of my grandparents. That is my grandfather and his second wife, Margaret. And so it was 1962, we confirmed. 1962, John Sibley, who was a mover and shaker in the Church of Christ at Dartmouth College, and who also was developing a missionary program in South Korea. And at the time, South Korea was effectively a third world country, right? It was a profoundly underdeveloped country. And so he's created this program, and he approaches my grandfather, knowing that my grandfather has a sabbatical coming. He says, hey, Chintz, how about coming with me to Korea for 6 months to do missionary? He said, my grandfather said, give me 24 hours. And said, okay, we'll go. So during that sabbatical year, he spent 6 months in Korea and then continued around the world. So I'm going to pause though, because I was too young. I mean, in 1962, I was 8. So I was only vaguely aware of my grandfather's strange trips to Korea. I just didn't know enough about this. But Bob and Jean became part of the program. Bob did month-long, is that right? Month-long dental workshops in Korea. Bob's family, Bob's kids, John and Jean Sibley's kids were utterly devoted to Korean culture and also to helping people in Korea, whether they were in Korea or whether they were students in this country. My grandfather would put up, as I think I mentioned in one of the slides there, if there were students from foreign countries who couldn't go back home during the vacation days, my grandparents would put them up. Come stay with us. What the heck? Amazing. And I know that some of these students were indeed from the Far East. They became long-lasting friends with some of these, particularly Korean and Chinese students. Can you help me here? How did this?
Well, I remember Chung Wan, who was a great help to me because he translated a forged letter that I had to write and sign John's signature to it to allow me to take sodium fluoride in 2 great big bottles of the white powder and get them into Korea when I was teaching the Koreans how to make fluoride mouthwashes. And the Keenes and the Sibleys are joined at the hip. is.
Yeah.
Because
Yeah.
my daughter ends up being a missionary with her husband in Nepal.
Yeah.
And my grandson, first and only grandson, the day he was born, my daughter left the hospital because there was epidemics of encephalitis and stuff at the hospital. And they were living at the Sibley's in Kathmandu because they normally were out in the.
The Sibleys were in Kathmandu also?
Oh, yes, of course. They were, John started a community health project in Kojodo, an island off the southern
I'm aware
coast
of
of
that,
Korea.
yeah,
And that's where I worked with him.
right.
And then they went to Thailand and they were helping Hmong refugees. And then they went to Nepal. And John worked.
Unbelievable.
Out in
So, I
hospital.
mean, so these people,
Just incredible.
unbelievable. I remember he went back to school. He was an
Got his
MD,
master's in public.
public health. Yeah, I remember. He was in his 50s. He said, I gotta get a master's in public health. So he would commute down to Harvard.
Yeah.
And he would do his master's in public health. I actually visited Karen and her husband in Nepal. I mean, I spent a year in India, and I said, if I'm in India, I have to get up to Nepal. So I spent 3 weeks in Kathmandu, and I touched base with your daughter
Right.
at least twice.
Right.
I remember. I had no idea this.
And Gene Sibley at 98 is still alive. and
I'm aware.
Functioning very well.
Yeah, so I'm aware. So these people, I regard the Sibleys and the Keens as part of Hanover history in a very special way, because it is an international community, and because it does have this rich set of connections with people overseas. Remarkable. And yes, I mean, the Keens and the Sibleys are joined at the hip. I dare say the Keens, the Sibleys, and the Allens were joined at the hip as well, right? I mean, gosh, amazing. So this is now a little blurb from a Kendall publication, which captures my grandparents to a T. When one mentions the names of Chinch and Margaret Allen, the word good neighbor springs to mind. The Allens have been and continue to be their brother's keepers. Both Chinch and Margaret have devoted their lives to helping their fellow men by running errands for shut-ins, by offering taxi service to church, by delivering food to sick friends, by working at a mission in Korea, or by meeting their neighbors with big smiles. They have never met a stranger and have an apparent built-in radar to locate those in need of a helping hand. Both Chinch and Margaret will tell you that they have not done anything out of the ordinary, which is what has made them so special. They have demonstrated a zest for living and have been role models of good citizenship for all of us to follow. Indeed, in some ways, I have to say, between my mom and my grandfather, I feel like I'm holding a torch. I have to say, I'm definitely aware of the very different ways in which my mother contributed to the community, my grandparents contributed to the community. So it's nice to be in a community which values long-term relationships. And I have to say, it's nice to be able to live in a house that was built in 1938 as been only in my family. Okay, so now I realized as I was putting this together that, oh, I'm also part of this history. So let me share you a little bit of my own history here. I mean, I've been sharing other, but I have to tell you that in 1977, 78, I lived in Hanover for about 18 months. I had finished undergraduate school. I had done a music major very quickly at Yale, and I didn't know anything. So I decided I needed to take some time off and write some music and study music before applying to graduate school. So I lived here and I got a part-time job at the medical school. And fortunately, a friend of mine from Milburn High School, Milburn, New Jersey, was an undergraduate at Dartmouth College and a music major. He said, Mark, check out the new music ensemble at Dartmouth College. Okay. So here is a poster of a concert of the new music ensemble at Dartmouth College from 1978. And this poster is dear to my heart because this poster is a collage of about 3 different pages from a score of mine for chorus, which I will share with you in a moment. This new music ensemble was led by a guy named Malcolm Goldstein, who's still with us, thank goodness. Malcolm Goldstein, a very remarkable composer and a very remarkable violinist, and that his relationship to the violin is profoundly unorthodox. He explores every cranny and interstice of the violin And yes, he does play Bach, but his thing is doing experimental things with the violin. And the beautiful thing about the New Music Ensemble of Dartmouth College was that he welcomed anybody regardless of their experience. And me, I had an undergraduate degree, but as I had not done much performing, I was studying flute very seriously at the time, but I was by no means a super accomplished flutist, and it did not matter. You're welcome, come in. It was improvisation based, so we were looking at unusual scores that were accessible to anybody who wished to try them out. It was an incredible model for me of be generous to everybody in the room, welcome everybody in the room. Everybody has something creative to contribute. Okay. So here's the program. What Malcolm did, this was the last semester he was in town. And it turned out that my high school friend was graduating that spring. I was leaving to go to University of Illinois. A third member of the group was leaving to go to seminary. And we were all composers. So Malcolm said, okay, the last concert of the New Music Ensemble of Dartmouth College is going to feature only music by you three. Okay, so this is what happened. And here's the program from that concert, right? This is May 13, 1978 in Rollins Chapel. And it so happens, I don't know, this is too small for you to see, but some of the people in my chorus, a couple of you might know. Kit Griggs is the name, Kit, right? Kit Griggs, right, was an alto in my piece. Stephen Ledbetter was on the faculty, right? And became a program annotator for the Boston Symphony, right?
And the Handel Society.
Indeed, exactly.
When I first was in it, yeah.
Oh, cool. Yeah, brilliant. So frankly, I basically put a sign-up sheet in the basement of the Hop, where the music department used to be, and said, hi, I'm doing this piece, please sign up. And I needed 16, and thank God, 16 people showed up. I mean, one of them, the soprano on the top there, Maria Weber Lamson, is a good friend of mine. When we discovered that, I mean, she sings with me a lot these days. When we discovered that she was in fact part of this performance as we were commuting to Burlington for a performance of the Bach B minor Mass, we both just went, oh, come on.
Wait,
Really,
did you say Maria Lamson?
Maria Lamson.
Oh, okay.
Yes, exactly. Okay, so I had two pieces on this piece, and here is a page from the score. This is a big piece of mine called Splays. That again was done in Rollins. The idea is that you spread out the singers. It's a piece that is conceived with space in mind, so sound moves left to right, and that's why things seem to move up and down here. And here's a little bit of this page. Stand back. Got the idea?
Yep.
So it's basically, this is a piece of electronic music for chorus, right? I mean, it's essentially, I mean, it's basically a set of sound textures. There's no specific, there's no specific notation. And there's no specific pitches. There's no text. It's all various vocal sound effects that I asked people to do. And I have to say, I mean, it's a big piece. It's a 25-minute piece. It was the piece which assured my parents that maybe something was going to come of this composition thing after all. Okay. And then finally, part of the history, what the heck, we need to jump ahead to 2024. Exactly. So, where are we here? I think I'm here somewhere. Here we are. last 10 years or so since I moved up here, to my surprise, I have to say, a little bit of my surprise, because I didn't really have a plan. When I moved up here, I just felt I needed to be closer to my parents, and the timing seemed right. So I moved up here, and I'm now the music director of the Upper Valley Symphony Orchestra. We've got 3 members of the orchestra, 4 members of the orchestra in the room, 5 members of the orchestra in the room. Indeed, 5. I mean, that's half the room right there. And I'm music director of the Upper Valley Community Band, and I've got this lovely a cappella group called Harmony Night. Anyway, I'm
And Bob study group?
no, indeed. I mean, that's only a partial list, but indeed, I have found that I found my way to leading various musical groups, and it's been a real joy for me, I have to say. I've done a lot of teaching, but I had not done. I mean, now I'm pretty much. Well, Malcolm has put it this way. Malcolm, who is still a dear friend, Malcolm introduced me in 1978. Someone, who's this guy? Malcolm introduced me as an itinerant musician. It's like, okay, that would be me, right?
But you become the music man of the Upper Valley.
Well, I've got these opportunities, and I am really so privileged to work with really, really accomplished musicians and help shape. I mean, we did the Schoenberg piece last month, and I'm still buzzing about that, I have to say. So anyway, it's fun. So that's all I have to say for the moment, and maybe I've overstayed my welcome. And I apologize if I have, but please, questions, fire away.
No, I comment.
Oh, please, please.
I remember your grandfather. I'm from Hanover. My dad owned the camera shop that used to be on Main Street.
Of course.
And I believe he was a patron.
Of course he was.
And I think I was so glad you said, what did you call it? The extra things he did to his racket. Because I had this vague memory, and so you confirmed it for me. I had started stamp collecting when I was in elementary school. And I believe, I'm very sure I got some of my stamps from him, not the valuable ones, but some of the good ones. And my parents were able to get land at the end of Spencer Road. So it connects to Wyeth. So I know that house, number 3.
3, exactly.
It used to have stone on the
They
bottom.
used to, exactly. They completely redid it in the
Yeah.
last 5 years, right?
Yeah.
It's like, yes.
Yes, I had a friend who lived there. So that must have been after your grandfather. And the only other comment I wanted to make was we used to have at the Hopkins Center in the summers and through the years, something called the Congregation of the Arts.
Sure.
And I was the babysitter for the Di Bonaventura family. And those were wonderful summers. They were amazing because Mario would bring to Hanover contemporary composers for residencies. And there were 2 concerts a week, lectures. And after a performance, they always gave a meal at their home to which we would be invited. And you got to meet these people. It was quite a wonderful time. And unfortunately, the college said, we're going to stop funding, which is really too bad.
I remember actually as a probably 10-year-old being taken to one of those concerts in Spalding.
Yep.
And I remember going, it was just a classic, it's what you want a 10-year-old to experience. I had no idea what was going on, but it was new music. It was electrifying. I didn't understand what I was hearing or seeing, but it was so exciting. Yes, the Congregation of the Arts was a big deal back in the 60s. It was, the college basically devoted a large lump of money to ensuring that Hopkins Center would be a place where new music would be flourishing. And so for about, how many years was it? 6, 7, was it?
I don't remember
Yeah.
when they stopped it. I just remember my father was absolutely devastated and then started organizing these mini concerts in front of the camera shop.
Yeah.
Nothing that replicated
Right.
the congregation
Right.
of the arts,
Right.
but I don't remember exactly.
Well, I think it was done by the end of the 60s. I don't think it was happening.
It was a huge loss.
Yeah.
Because Hanover was becoming a center
Yeah.
for modern music, and the composers who came.
Yeah.
I mean, Zoltan Kodály.
I'm aware. In
It
fact,
was-
we did, a group of us did one of his last major piece was a piece called Laudes Organi, in praise of the organ. It's a piece for chorus and organ, which a group of us did in August of 2023. So just last year in Mary Keene Chapel, a stunning piece, which he did while in residence at the Congregation of the Arts just about a year before he died. It's a
And
major piece indeed.
We did, so they allowed people from the community to sing in the chorus. So I got to sing
cool.
the chorus, and we did his opera Spinnstube, which was beautiful.
Wow. Wow.
Yeah.
You see, I lament, this is why I praise Malcolm Goldstein so much. I just think it's so great to include community people. I mean, he didn't know me from a post. And I walked in there, I had no connection to Dartmouth at all. And it didn't, well, except I was an employee in medical school. But, and he's like, okay, welcome, have a seat, let's do it. Ciao, Granthia.
Thank you.
Cheers. So at the time, I just think there was, Malcolm also led something called the Dartmouth Collegium, which was half community people, right? It was some undergraduates, but it was half community people. I really admired that, and it has stuck with me. I really appreciated what he did there. And yes, I mean, he brought John Cage to Hanover, and Christian Wolff was on the faculty for years and years and years. And Christian Wolff was a major figure in new music, still a major figure in new music at age 91 or whatever it is. It's really something. Please.
You showed the Ledyard Bridge earlier, so maybe this question's okay. It's kind of historical,
Please.
if that's all right.
Of course.
I'm curious, was the original bridge called the Ledyard Bridge? And why and how was the name Ledyard chosen?
No idea.
Oh,
That's a
okay.
very good question.
Yeah, thanks, Simon.
And I'll bet it's not difficult to find out. So we should find out, right? I mean,
Yeah.
there's the Ledyard Canoe Club, which is right there.
Well, there's
right?
John Ledyard.
Say again?
John Ledyard, the man.
Right.
He was an explorer, I know.
Yeah, so name for him.
But I don't know what prompted the powers that be to name the bridge after him. Be a good question.
Didn't it have something to do with the
Tim says.
thought it had something to do with getting a steamboat for they basically had contests. Everyone was going nuts to see how far north they could get on the river. And I thought it had something to do with that. I could be wrong.
Rings a bell.
I've read too many histories. Might have been from the 76.
Okay, this sounds like a story worth pursuing.
Yes.
Goodness,
Ledyard name.
goodness.
My father used to talk about the students that would go to the Hanover, New Hampshire side of the Ledyard Bridge and collect their whiskey during the when he was in his college.
We have a question from the,
Comment from John Buskey, who says, I have fond memories of Friday night dances at the church in the 48 to 51 period. I think Mr. Fisk was the minister. Cynthia Fisk not was his daughter. High school class of 1953, question mark.
Right, Carolyn Fisk was the daughter and Chet Fisk was the father. And the church was a teen center and we square danced our hearts out every Friday night.
so good, so good. Yeah,
And there were men I was in the rhythmic choir when I was in high school. And I have found through the help of a young lady, researched and found the movie that we had done.
Oh.
And it was featured in Life magazine. And she's found some of these materials which are in the historical part of the church.
Can you steer me towards that video?
I would be happy to-
Please, please. I mean, I'd love to see this in action. Goodness. Amazing. Well, boys and girls, children of all ages, questions? Go ahead, sir. Go
Well,
ahead.
it's up to you.
No, please.
One more historical question, if I may. I'm in a German speaking group here in the Upper Valley, and the group's very interested in the name Hanover. But one thing that comes up frequently is what the original charter in 1761 had two ends, like the German end. And so we keep bringing up who decided to drop the second end and why and how. Was it a secretarial error?
So this sounds like a good question for Ms. Bittinger.
I don't know the answer.
Yeah.
Bill?
Right? I think this is a great question. And indeed, go for it. Someone has an answer? Go for it, Megan.
We have a book in the library, and we used to be in the local history section. I think it's now in the 900s. I can dig it up for you, Bill. But it's from the 1970s when the whole bicentennial fever hit the nation, and it explains why all the New Hampshire towns have their name. And I think it does address the double life.
Oh,
So
okay.
I will have to find it.
Please. Okay, there you go.
I've asked that, but it keeps coming up.
That's right. I am by no means an authority on Hanover history. I've lived some of the history in a very kind of particular way, but this is a great question that is worth pursuing further. Okay, then. I think we should call it there. Thank you so much.